Hey guys, it's Ann Yorks from the Flower Box, and I am so excited to be decorating cookies, celebrating my favorite season of the year, autumn. And every year, my family, we take a trip to the farm. We buy pumpkins, apples, we go for a hayride and eat apple cider donuts. It's a ton of fun. And so this cookie decorating kit and tutorial celebrate autumn at the farm. Let's cookie it up. Let's take a look at this round pumpkin. We're outlining in a tulip red using piping icing in tip number 2. Then I'm going to fill it in those side sections using a 10-second flood icing. Now to just add a quick little interesting detail, we'll add those itty bitty polka dots using white flood icing. This is pretty quick, doesn't add much work or time, but adds something interesting to the design. After those 2 sections have a chance to dry in front of a fan for about an hour, I'm ready to come back in and flood that center section. Now I allow those side sections to dry because it just creates that natural line between those pumpkin sections and just gives that bumpy pumpkin look. Now here's the cool part. I have some brown elite color. This is a petal dust for dusting onto the surface of your cookies. And I also have the round brush from the new Flower Box 2-piece brush set. And I'm just going to dip that round brush into the brown dust, and I'm going to brush that dust into those different icing areas. I'm really hitting those sections where the shadows would tend to gather, just to give this pumpkin a little bit more dimension and deeper look. And it really just kind of gives a little bit something interesting to that pumpkin look. And I can't wait to show you how I also use this on the pickup truck from this set. Now let's take a look at one more variation on this pumpkin design. This is our plaque cookie cutter. This is going to have the message on it. So we're flooding in using this pastel brown icing color. I've added a couple dots of ivory to that brown just to give it more of a subtle fall brown look. And I want to allow that base icing to dry because now I'm ready to stencil the words "Fall in Love with Autumn." And I'm using that white icing. I'm spreading the icing generously over the stencil, and then I will gently lift that stencil genie frame to the side to reveal the words. I also didn't add any shading to this cookie. I just wanted a nice clean finish. A quick stem and a leaf, and this cookie is done. My favorite cookie from this set is the wheelbarrow, and I'm going to start by outlining that wheel first. I'm just using my piping icing since it's such a small area, and then I'm ready to start outlining the wheelbarrow. I'm starting with that handle, and then I'll outline the actual main body of the wheelbarrow, and then I'll add that leg there at the bottom, all using the Buckeye Brown piping icing with tip number 2. Once I have that outlined, I'm ready to add the pumpkin, which I do in 3 sections, same as that large pumpkin we just did. And then I'm ready to flood in. I'm using the light pastel Buckeye Brown in the main section, and I'm using the darker Buckeye Brown to add the rest of the wheelbarrow. Don't forget to pipe a few spokes in the wheel just to add a fun little detail. Now once this cookie has a chance to dry, I'm ready to go back in and flood those pumpkin sections. But these sections are getting a little small, so notice I've added that piped squiggle to add some structure underneath that flood icing. This helps prevent those craters that can often form in those small icing areas. Now I'll flood in the rest of the wheelbarrow. We'll allow that to dry, and then we can finish off the flood with that center pumpkin section. Once this cookie is fully dry, we're ready to go in and add a little bit of shading using the round brush and the brown Elite petal dust. I really do like to get in those cracks. I find that that's where those shadows tend to be formed, and that really adds the depth to this pumpkin design. This is a great alternative to airbrushing, so no airbrush required, and it just adds those highlights and the shading to the cookie, and it doesn't take very long. Now, once the shading is done, I'll add a little stem to that pumpkin, and this cookie is good to go. It's a cute cookie that doesn't require a ton of extra details, but you could personalize it in the center there if you wanted. To start the pickup truck that has pumpkins filling up the back of the bed, we're going to add that window section first, which is just a thin layer of white piping icing. So I'm using my icing scraper to just spread that white icing on the top of the cookie. Now I'm ready to outline the cookie. I'll start with the bumper, I'll add the truck bed, and then I'll add the top of the truck, all using that pastel turquoise icing and a piping tip number 2. Now I did add ivory food gel to both the turquoise and this sunset orange just to give that muted fall color look. For a full look at those icing colors that are used in this set, check out the blog post on flowerbox.com for these cookies. Okay, we're flooding in alternating areas, and we're going to just flood in these sections to fill in the cookie ready for the details. So I did the pumpkin in the back, the door on the pickup truck. Now I'm flooding in the pumpkins that are in the foreground and some of these other truck sections like that bumper and the sides of the truck there. And we're just flooding in nice and generously to get a nice full look. Adding those small little areas, you don't need to outline those. We're just using the flood icing to pipe those side mirrors. Now we'll fill in that last pumpkin, and we're ready for some details. Using that brown dust, I'm going to give this truck a little bit of an antiqued look, like this is a vintage truck that's carrying all these pumpkins. So I'm not brushing the brown dust all over the entire truck. I'm just gonna hit some of the highlights. I also wanna add some shading to the pumpkins, so I'm just kind of hitting those on the top left corner of the pumpkins. Once the shading is complete, I'll add some piped lines to the pumpkins using the orange icing with a tip number 1.5. Just those simple piped lines, and now these pumpkins really look like pumpkins. You can add the wheels using black piping icing in tip number 2. And pipe in a zigzag motion up and down. Now we'll add a few details to the truck itself. I'm adding just a piped accent line on that back door using the turquoise icing and tip number 1. I also have a tip number 1 on my black icing to pipe the words "Hello Fall." Now I am using a copy cake projector, and this is projecting the image. You can download this text graphic on the blog post that goes with this kit to use in your projector. Add the license plate using white piping icing and flooding icing. add stems to the pumpkins using a tip number 1 and Buckeye brown icing. I'm adding some rear lights to those fenders on the back. And you can personalize this license plate. I'm using piping icing here and just adding the word pumpkin, but you can also use a food marker. I found that to be even a little bit easier than using the icing. So you decide what you have and how to add that personalization. Oh my goodness, that cookie is so much fun to make and it turns out so cute. Let's take a look at this fall leaf. This is the hawthorn leaf shape, and it's also included in the Autumn on the Farm cookie decorating kit that goes with this video. We're going to just flood in nice and generously. This is one of our accent cookies. So we have a simple white icing base that will allow to dry for about an hour in front of the fan. And then we're going to come back and add some leaf detail. So I'm just piping the vein, and then I'll outline some small teardrop sections that we're going to flood in for the leaf as well. When I'm flooding in these small areas, I do try to keep the flood from covering over that vein detail, just to add a little bit of depth to those leaf designs. And then I'll flood in that center stem. Again, once that has a chance to dry, I'll just dust the center of each of those little leaf sections. This cookie is almost done. I'm just going to add some little dots just to fill in the negative space, and I'm using that light pastel brown flood. You can do this cookie in all the icing colors and it just will look so pretty and fall. Now let's take a look at the farm sign. I am piping each of the planks on the sign in the sunset orange, the white, and the turquoise. You can see my white piping icing is almost out for this last cookie, so I'm really pushing those last bits through. Add the wood post using the brown piping icing, and I do add a little line of piping between those planks just to show that the post is going all the way down through. Now as we flood in these planks, I'm going to add a little bit of fall fun and add a plaid design to the top using wet on wet techniques. I'm adding some white flood stripes and some pastel brown stripes to create that plaid pattern in the background. A nice generous flood on the white section, and then we'll fill in the bottom plank with the turquoise and add just a few dots using the tulip red icing. I'm keeping those dots at the top and bottom because I know I'm going to be piping text through the center. After those planks have a chance to dry, we'll flood in the post and then we're ready for the details. I have my brown Elite color and my brush, and I'm just adding some shading to this post. Not only can you use this shading to antique things and add depth and shading, but I also think it gives this signpost a little bit of a weathered look. So again, I'm just working that color into the nooks and crannies of the cookie, and you can see I'm brushing off any excess color on my brush using that paper towel that the cookie is sitting on. Adding the text can be as interesting or as simple as you need it to be. So on this cookie, I'm adding the words, "Welcome to the patch, pick your own pumpkins," and then I have cider and corn maze down at the bottom there. But you could always do just one word per plank to simplify the piping, especially if you don't have a projector to use and you need to do an easier plan. Anytime I'm piping lettering, I have a nice piping icing, not too thick, not too thin, in my icing bag with a tip number 1. I'm using a super light hand pressure as I'm piping out those individual letters. I do try to avoid thin icing. Thin icing can really blob and your letters will lose their shape. But if your icing is too stiff, you can see some pops in your icing and it can be more difficult to pipe those pretty cursive letters. So when I am working on my icing consistencies and I know I'm going to be planning to make some text, I look for that really soft peak piping icing. For a review on icing consistencies, definitely check out the Cookies 101 blog post on flowerbox.com. Now, sometimes it takes a little bit of shifting of the cookie to fit all of the text in. So here I'm going to first pipe the word cider, then I'm sliding the cookie over to keep hayrides nice and close to that word. And then after I have hayrides on the cookie, I'll give the cookie one more shift to bring corn maze into view. This is definitely a little bit of a squeeze, and some of the other cookies that I did with this set definitely simplifies the text just a little bit. This cookie set is so much fun to make. These cookies work well as a collection, or you can pick one and make a dozen of those. I hope you enjoyed seeing how to add depth and dimension to your cookies, shading with that brown dust. And if you're looking for more details on how to make these cookies, definitely check out the Autumn on the Farm blog post on flowerbox.com. That's all for today. I can't wait to decorate with you again. Happy decorating!